Uh-huh. I just feel like I've been around the block, ripping up fantasy stock, working around the clock. Look at the view from the top. Researching rookies a lot? No, I just be listening to pods, yeah. One in particular, I'm just a messenger, let me just pass on the rock. Browning, brunning, pruning, pronouncing ain't what he's doing. What he's doing is not losing, but infusing you with new things. And there's Dennis the Bennett, yeah. The man is a menace, yeah. Building a dynasty, some of the finest things. Promise you, you won't regret it. Sly as a fox, cultured in pop. Give him his props. Here is a thought, here is a box. And you cannot compare them at all, so don't even try. Careful with the news, but when you use a take, I take up Tony Fire. I mean Dyer, because anyone else is a huge mistake. Whoa, fantasy round table, fantasy round table. Yeah. Fantasy round table, come take a look at the crown, baby. Hey, fantasy round table, fantasy round table. Woo. Fantasy round table, come take a look at the crown, baby. Go.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Fantasy Football Roundtable Podcast. It is Monday, July 3rd. We're almost on the holiday weekend, and you know what? NFL teams come back to work this month. Training camp will kick off toward the end of the month, and that's why we are racing through our team previews. Today we will be looking at the top half of the AFC North. So some teams that are in competition but aren't quite as near and dear to Matt's heart. But Matt, you ready for 4th of July?
I mean, I'm ready for a day off. So I don't want to make it sound like it's not a holiday worth celebrating. I personally don't like celebrate it, and I don't do anything. It's just nice to have a day off. So
it is nice to have a day off. Dennis, you also seem like you were looking forward to a day off.
I'm looking forward to all my days off, to be perfectly honest. Yeah, I'm still pretty far away from that, because I'm old and my kids are just starting college. So I'm gonna have to. I'm a solid 10 to 12 years away from having all my days off.
That's closer than I am, at least. So
someday we'll get there. Well, it is the slower season for the NFL, but there's still news coming out. One of the things that broke late last week that we didn't get to, left tackle Cam Robinson suspended for the first 4 games for the Jaguars. I'll start with you, Dennis. What do you think this means for the Jaguars, who I think most of us think are potential playoff contenders?
You never want to lose your starting left tackle, and I'm pulling up their depth chart here to see who their backup is. So Walker Little is their backup. Former Cleveland Brown, if I'm correct there, Bruni.
I believe so, yes.
And, there's a reason he's a backup and played on, a few different teams. I mean, it's 4 games, and I think he'll hold up okay. I think Little is a serviceable tackle. It's not as good as Robinson. I don't know that they're going to move Anton Harrison to the left to give him a shot. He's a rookie. I think he played right tackle in college, if I remember correctly, and it would make sense to keep him there. So they'll piece it together while Robinson is out. I mean, one of the things they got going for him is that Trevor Lawrence is 6'6" and 230 pounds. And he's very, very mobile. So as long as he continues to see the field pretty clearly and take a step in his maturity and his growth, he'll do a good job identifying where the pressure's coming from, put the team in a good position, get rid of the ball quick, and be able to scramble. I know Lawrence, despite his ability to run, doesn't run much, kind of in that Mahomes mold there, though I think Lawrence is a little better athlete than Mahomes. I think they'll be fine. They'll get through it, and I still have them winning their division. So,
yeah, I mean, I guess the thing you could say is that division's probably arguably one of the easiest in all of the NFL. So even if they struggle outside of that division, they probably have the best odds, and I would say probably the best bet to win that division, unless Anthony Richardson is just much better than people think he's going to be and is able to take to what I do think is the overall best team in the division in the Colts. a step forward. But obviously, as Dennis mentioned, you don't ever want to lose your left tackle. But at least they're getting him back. It's not like we're talking about some injury that happened before training camp or anything like that. It sucks going into the season. Good thing is, I should put it this way. It's not like this happened in week 3 of the preseason where all of a sudden as you're going, you got a week to figure out what you're doing, not having a left tackle. It's happening now before any of the camps start. You have time to figure out whatever you're going to do there until Robinson's able to come back. They're a good enough team. They'll figure it out. I personally don't think their schedule's that hard either. Like, they'll be fine. Is it ideal? Absolutely not. But it is what it is. It's not a death blow to a team that should make the playoffs.
Yeah, and speaking of that schedule, so the first 4 games, they start at the Colts. Then they have 3 straight home games against the Chiefs, Texans, and Falcons. And while we think the Chiefs are a good team, none of those 4 has a tremendous pass rush.
Yeah.
In fact, the Chiefs gave up one of their better pass rushing assets from last year in Frank Clark. So that'll be kind of putting it back together. So that works out a little bit better for the Jaguars. Well, as I mentioned, we are moving on to the AFC North, and we are starting with the champions, the Cincinnati Bengals. In 2022, they were 12-4. They finished first in the AFC North and lost in the AFC Championship game. Key additions this offseason, they got left tackle Orlando Brown from the Chiefs. They got Cody Ford at guard. They picked up Irv Smith Jr. at tight end and safety Nick Scott. Key losses, Samaje Perine, the running back, went to the Broncos. Hayden Hurst, their tight end from last year, went to the Panthers, as did starting safety Von Bell. Their other starting safety, Jesse Bates, went to the Falcons. In the draft, they picked up Miles Murphy, a pass rusher, DJ Turner, a corner, and then later they got Charlie Jones, another wide receiver. Key fantasy assets, you should know these names by now. Joe Burrow finished as quarterback 4 last year. Joe Mixon was running back 10 last year. Wide receivers, Jamar Chase was wide receiver 11. T. Higgins, wide receiver 18. Tyler Boyd was wide receiver 34. Smith last year was tight end 43, was in Minnesota, and Devin Asiasi is the other tight end they brought in. He was tight end 110 last year. Matt, I'll start with you. What are your fantasy expectations for the Bengals? How good can this team be?
I think you're arguably talking about one of the best offenses in the NFL, and I expect that to kind of pan out in fantasy as well. I mean, Joe Burrow's likely going to be a top 3. I know he finished QB4. I imagine like QB5, people will think that's a disappointment. And typically he's probably, even if he falls to QB5, it's going to be maybe 20 points behind Mahomes and Allen, who are up at the top. Like, it's not a massive gap. He's going to have a great season. As long as Jamar Chase stays healthy, he's going to be an absolute stud. Wide receiver 11, and he missed 2 games last year because of injury. Still finishes a top 12 wide receiver. He got shafted on a call in the championship week as well, because that was a touchdown in the left side of the end zone. So he probably been even higher than that. T. Higgins is a really good complementary piece. I know we've kind of talked about, especially when we've done our wide receiver rankings, none of us have had him extremely high. It feels like he's always valued as like a top 12 wide receiver in fantasy. He doesn't ever really finish up there, but still a really, really good wide receiver too. And then you have Tyler Boyd, who's a really, really good wide receiver 3. The offensive line has seen some improvements. That defense, I think, is going to be fine. I think they're comparable to the Chiefs as the best team in the AFC. I really wish they weren't in the AFC North, because I'd love for the Browns to get an easy road at some point to the division, but the Bengals they're just an incredible team. And when you have a quarterback led by Joe Burrow, it's even better. I expect this team to be really, really good. I know they brought in Irv Smith. I'm going to be honest, that doesn't really move the needle for me at this point at tight end. Not only do they not really use the tight end, I think I need to see it with Irv Smith, but the rest of this team, with where you're getting them in drafts, I'm willing to buy into every single one of these offensive pieces.
Yeah. So in the Dynasty Nerds June ADP, Burrow is going off as QB4, which is interesting to me. I know his rookie season, he ran a little bit more. Then he had the knee injury, and he's kind of cut back on the running. Joe Mixon, it's apropos that he plays for the Bengals, because the guy seems to have 9 lives. In what was widely regarded as, foreshadowing the end with Samaje Perine taking passing down snaps from Mixon to end last year because Mixon wasn't a good pass blocker. And everybody, the quote unquote everybody in the analyst community, me included, expecting them to draft a running back to replace Mixon. And they drafted Chase Brown, who's worse at pass blocking than Joe Mixon. So it seems like right now there's a little bit of a standoff. They want Mixon to take a pay cut, but they haven't really done anything to support playing hardball with him. So it's almost like they're going to have to stick with him. Mixon he's going as RB22 in startups, which I think is probably appropriate, but I feel like he's going to have a much better year than that this year unless something happens between now and the regular season. We still got a couple guys out there that could impact him, whether it's Kareem Hunt or Zeke Elliott or Leonard Fournette, even Dalvin Cook. Who knows what? There are guys out there that could come in and eat into Mixon's production, but I still think he's playing well enough, and this team is evolving into a very, very much of a pass-first team. Higgins and Chase are going high. Chase is wide receiver 2. Higgins is coming off the board in startups at wide receiver 10. People are still buying into him. Boyd is who's dropped. Boyd is going in drafts as wide receiver 80 in the mock drafts. It seems like people are out. I don't know if they're buying the Irv Smith, if they're just think he's an afterthought because he's only got a year or two left on his contract and he's 28 years old and, they're just going to move away from him. To me, T. Higgins would be the wide receiver 1 on about 30 NFL teams. And Tyler Boyd would be a wide receiver 2 on about 31 NFL teams. 30. He wouldn't be the wide receiver 2 in maybe we'll go 29 in Philadelphia and Miami. He'd still be the wide receiver 3. Everywhere else, Boyd would be a wide receiver 2 on that team. So they've got a ton of weapons. Irv Smith, I'm with Matt. I want to buy in. He was my breakout tight end, and then he got injured, and Minnesota didn't bring him back. Devin Asiasi has never panned out. To be honest, it seems like what Cincinnati has done at the tight end position maybe bodes well for Tyler Boyd. So he may be a real value if you can get him in that wide receiver 6 range. I feel like the Irv Smith, not a willing blocker, not necessarily great. Devin Asiasi isn't a threat in the passing game. I know we're going to get a lot of points out of Chase and Higgins and Mixon. We'll see what happens behind Mixon. It could get messy if Mixon gets injured, though.
Yeah, and a slight correction. Jamar Chase only played 12 games last year. He missed 4. And he only played 12. They only had a possible 16 against most people's 17. So in 12 games, he saw 134 targets, 87 receptions, 1,046 yards, and 9 touchdowns. Still led the Bengals in targets, receptions, yardage, and touchdowns, even missing those 4 games. So pretty incredible. I think, Dennis, you touched on probably, if I was thinking about Mixon, my biggest fear is that there are still some robust name options out there. And in fact, I think all 3 of us are in the Scott Fish draft. That's something I think about as we get closer to having these some of these early redraft drafts. The fact that guys like Ezekiel Elliott, Kareem Hunt, Dalvin Cook, and Leonard Fournette haven't signed anywhere. I feel like if that comes at the end of July or the beginning of August, which feels like where it's tracking, that's going to be the crusher of some dreams for some people going into the season. And Mixon could well be one of those people, because I think we were all a little surprised, as you said, they didn't do something more substantial at running back, because Samaje Perine finished as running back 34, played a lot of snaps, especially in crucial situations down the stretch. Mixon did not have an incredible year, only He carried for less than 4 yards per rush attempt. Did have quite a few receptions, which I think buoyed him up. But I was a little surprised when I saw he finished as running back 10 last year. I think that more speaks to the fungible nature of the position and all the injuries we saw than some kind of stellar performance he had. But Dennis, you seem to have touched on a little bit. Who is your fantasy value for the Bengals?
Honestly, I guess I got to go with Tyler Boyd at that ADP. I suspect the ADP over at Fantasy Pros has him a bit higher.
He's wide receiver 51 on Fantasy Pros.
So even then, that's a wide receiver 5. I still think that's probably pretty good value still. They're running a lot of drafts over at Dynasty Nerds, and Peter's gathering up this ADP, but it is Dynasty Startup ADP, and it's probably a lot of people that listen to the podcast and all that fun stuff, and so Boyd at somewhere in the 50s, I think, is a pretty good value.
Yeah, I mean, especially if he ends up being a wide receiver 3, he's probably the best value. I'm going to stick with Joe Mixon. I mean, I don't think there's a great value. I think all these players are priced fairly well. I mean, you've got T. Higgins is coming off the board as wide receiver 14. I mean, that's probably a little rich. I think he probably finishes closer to wide receiver 18 again, but it's not a bad price to pay for him. I mean, Jamar Chase, obviously top wide receiver off the board with Justin Jefferson. You're not getting a discount on Joe Burrow either. So I'll go with Mixon, as you both mentioned, just to keep it short. I mean, they haven't brought anybody in. While I like Chase Brown, he's not even the runner that Joe Mixon can be. He's not a guy that's a tough runner like Joe Mixon can be. He's really more of that burst guy, the lightning to Joe Mixon's thunder. He is definitely, in my opinion, at least a better pass catcher than Joe Mixon, but he's not a guy that I think you're giving the ball to 30 times a game. He's going to have scripted touches and be kind of a spell back, I think, for Mixon. In my opinion, he's coming back. Yeah, I guess you have to worry a little bit about a Zeke, but I mean, the last we saw Zeke and Joe Mixon, if you're telling me they're competing for the starting job, I'm leaning pretty heavily Joe Mixon unless they just cut him. He definitely looked a lot more explosive, like the better running back than the last time we saw Zeke on the field. So I don't have a massive fear about them bringing somebody in and him losing out a ton of touches and production because of the way they'll use him. And again, it's arguably one of, if not the most explosive offense in the NFL. So you want the players in there. Give me Joe Mixon because, again, you're getting him at RB15. I think there's a really decent shot he finishes, as long as he's healthy, as at least a top 12 back. So you're getting a small amount of value with that pick.
Yeah, I think for me, the only value really is Tyler Boyd at wide receiver 51. He finished as wide receiver 34 last year. Even if he comes down a little bit, it's not going to be hard for him to be better than wide receiver 51. And you're right, there is no discount on Burrow and Chase, and there shouldn't be. I think Higgins is a little high probably for what I'd want. And even Irv Smith, I went to go look to see. He's going as tight end 17. You got to be kidding me. I know that Hayden Hurst vacated 68 targets, but we just talked about Irv Smith. I'm not paying tight end 17 prices. If he was tight end 40, I'd be like, that might be worth a shot. But tight end 17, you have him kind of in that soft middle where you're actually expecting that you're going to start him at some point. So that Boyd would probably be my pick. I thought it was easy to pick a fantasy value on this team. It might be even easier to answer this question. Matt, I will start with you. Where do you see the Bengals finishing in 2023?
I mean, I think they're only going to have maybe 5 losses at best. They've got a fairly good schedule this year. Your toughest matchups, I mean, obviously the Chiefs, but we've seen they can beat the Chiefs. So I don't know that you could even count that necessarily as a loss. I would put the Ravens and the Browns and the Steelers up there as games that they possibly could lose. I don't know that they lose to each one of them, but every year we see them lose 1 or 2 to those 3. The AFC North, even when the Browns and Bengals sucked, they were still beating the Steelers and Ravens at times. It's just a very tough division, obviously, having those rivals. The Bills, a tough game. I think the Vikings could be a tough game. So if I had to pick one, I'm going to say that they finish 12-5 and probably the top of the AFC North once again.
Yeah, I have them at 13-4, and I don't like teams working out with wins in the teens. It seems relatively those are outlier victory totals. But when I look, like I've got the Browns taking them week one. The Browns are at home. It could go either way, but I've got the Bengals in week 17 beating the Browns at home. I've got them losing to San Francisco in San Francisco, losing to Jacksonville in Jacksonville. To me, that feels like it's they'll be coming off a home game against the Steelers, a division game. They've got the Colts the following week, and it feels like, well, they may not. They may kind of try to coast a little bit, and I feel like the Jags are going to have a pretty good offense, and so I feel like they're going to get caught. I do have Kansas City beating them in week 17. So it was tough. I've got them beating the Steelers on the road, which probably, is going to be a challenge, but I don't think it's going to be the Steelers' year this year. I think they're going to be I think the AFC North is going to be one of the toughest divisions. But I've got them at 13-4, which is probably too many. But I mean, I can only go back and change so much stuff. It's like, what I'm going to make everybody 9-8 and 8-9.
I mean, modern NFL, but no. I think they're probably going to win 12 or 13 games. I think if they would have played the whole season out, they probably would have been 13-4 last year. I think the way that game was tracking of how it started, they probably would have beaten Buffalo. I think they'll be one of the top seeds and win their division. The Bengals have been on a pretty good trajectory the last couple of years. I don't really see that changing, barring some kind of catastrophic injuries. Our next team, which is the Baltimore Ravens, might be a little bit harder to figure out. In 2022, they finished as 10-7, second in the AFC North, but they fell short of the playoffs. Key additions, they picked up quarterback Josh Johnson. They picked up wide receiver Odell Beckham Jr. and wide receiver Nelson Aguilar. Probably their biggest move was signing quarterback Lamar Jackson back and being able to agree to a deal there to know he will be back. Key losses, guard Ben Powers went to the Broncos, defensive end Calais Campbell went to the Falcons. In the draft, they picked up Zay Flowers at wide receiver, Trenton Simpson, the linebacker. Key fantasy assets, Lamar Jackson was QB 14 last year, missed the home stretch of the season once again. Tyler Huntley, who they also signed back as a restricted free agent, finished as QB 40, not running back. In the backfield, J.K. Dobbins was running back 57, Gus Edwards was running back 66, and Justice Hill, who they retained, was running back 82. But wide receiver, Rashad Bateman was wide receiver 111, did not play very many games again last year. Zay Flowers is there. Odell Beckham Jr. did not play any games last year as he was recovering from an ACL, has joined the team. Nelson Aguilar was with the Patriots, was wide receiver 94, and Devin Duvernay was wide receiver 58 for Baltimore. At tight end, Mark Andrews was tight end 4, and young tight end Isaiah Likely was tight end 27. Dennis, what do you expect from the Ravens offense fantasy-wise? They've invested quite a bit in getting Lamar Jackson back and trying to get him some weapons. Do you think the passing offense will improve?
I mean, improve to what? So, I mean, it can improve and still not be very good as a passing offense. We keep hearing all off season about Todd Monken being this passing game. He's going to bring this modern offense to Baltimore. And while I do, like the potential, we've seen Monken use Brock Bowers at Georgia, who's a tight end, in just a phenomenal way. And they already have Mark Andrews, who's an exceptional tight end, probably top 2 or 3 tight end in the NFL. They've got Isaiah Likely, who, when Andrews was out last year, Likely stepped right in and did a great job. They've got Charlie Kolar, who was highly regarded coming out of Iowa State, I believe, and they've got him there still. So there's some weapons. I keep finding myself, so I've been doing a little dabbling in underdog. And I keep finding myself drafting Odell Beckham in like the 10th or 11th round. I'm looking at the other people there, and it's best ball, and I'm going, well, the potential for upside is there. It may only be a few games, but you could potentially get some big games out of Odell Beckham. And potentially, if he stays healthy, you could get some big games, even if they're not winning a lot. To me, I feel like sort of the end of training camp and beginning of the season, you might want to start to buy into the Ravens a little bit for 2024 if you're rebuilding. We talk a lot about a quarterback and a head coach and an offensive coordinator in their second year together with all three of them. 2024 will be, God willing, all things, point that Monken will make it through the year. But that'll be year 2 in Todd Monken's offense. And it should next year, if they all stay together, you could see a real explosion on offense next year. Lamar's going to do what he does. He's shown the ability in his MVP season to be very efficient with his passing game. That was probably the high water mark in efficiency for him. I don't think he's going to get 36 touchdowns again. He could. But if you're getting, 700 yards rushing and 24 to 26 touchdowns passing out of Lamar, I think he'll take that every day. I mean, that puts him in top 5 quarterback range right there. And J.K. Dobbins, 2 years removed from his knee injury, and we saw last year, I'll keep pounding the table. Last year, his vision was on display. He was getting through the line. He was picking out the holes. He just wasn't healed to the point where he could put any breakaway speed together. He was getting 20-yard, 25-yard rushes, even some 30 or 35, whereas prior to the knee injury, he would pull away on some of those. 2 years now from that injury, I think Dobbins is going to have a real good year. Bateman scares me a little bit. He's had that foot injury. It's lingered for a couple years. And, the rest of the guys outside of Odell are they're just Jags. And to this point, I don't think we can call Bateman a success, but if he stays healthy this year, he could be. So there's some real potential there. It all rides on Lamar Jackson, though.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see how much this offense changes with them bringing over Todd Monken. He has definitely shown in the past that he is a much more pass-friendly offensive coordinator than what we had with Greg Roman. I mean, you even go back to the times Greg Roman was with his brother, John Harbaugh, in San Francisco, and what they really do with Colin Kaepernick. I do think that they're going to move away from the rushing a little bit with Lamar Jackson. And he's shown over the past couple of years he's a much better passer than maybe a lot of us, including myself, thought when he first came out of college. And you go back to his last time that he was in the NFL was the 2019 season with the Cleveland Browns. Freddie Kitchens was the head coach at the time. That's how far back we're going. And while the team did not do as well as people had hoped, obviously coming off of, this was the season after Baker's great rookie year. We thought, okay, he was going to take that step forward, and they ended up finishing 6-10. They ended up losing a lot of those games, like on the last drives of those games. We had that Thursday night, I think it was a Thursday night game against the Rams where they were driving down the field and could have won. That was the last time that Odell had his best season as well. He had over 1,000 yards in that offense, and I think would have been a much better fantasy player if he had just gotten touchdowns. He only had 2 touchdowns that year. I think, you get positive touchdown regression. He probably ends up having a really good year. Jarvis Landry, over 1,100 yards, multiple touchdowns. Like, it was a really good offense, and then we saw what he's been able to do in Georgia the past couple of years. I think Mark Andrews is going to have a phenomenal year. He knows how to use those tight ends. Now, he's not quite the athlete that Brock Bowers is, but Mark Andrews is an incredible athlete, incredible tight end. He's probably going to smash yet again when you bring in an offensive coordinator who knows how to use tight ends that way. I do think Odell's probably the second option. We've seen that he likes to stretch the field. And I just don't know who else stretches the field. I don't know that it's going to be Rashad Bateman. I mean, the fact that he's already had to take another shot in that foot where the Liz Frank injury is scares me. The fact that he's already dealing with pain from that. We've seen it takes guys a long time to come back from those injuries. He's had multiple other injuries on top of that. Like, it just, for me, I find it very hard to bet on Rashad Bateman. He's one of those players, like, I've got to see it before I'm willing to do it. And Zay Flowers, like, I get it. He's an extremely athletic player. He's got a lot of tools in his box that you like. I don't think, yeah, and not only is he tiny, like a lot of people talk about all he did was play outside in college. That's great. It was in the ACC against not great competition. He's not doing that in the NFL, folks. He's just not. He's a slot wide receiver. And when you look at what Todd Monken's offense has done in college and in the NFL, that is why I think Zay Flowers may not succeed the way people think he will. It's someone in the short area of the field and someone deep. The short area of the field is Mark Andrews. It's going to be Mark Andrews. Now, will Zay Flowers get some of that? Absolutely. But I don't think he's jumping Mark Andrews anytime soon. I think he's likely, if Rashad Bateman is healthy, the fourth option on this team. I don't feel great betting on Odell Beckham Jr. I don't even know if he has an ACL in his knee anymore, as many times as he's torn it. I'd love for him to come back and be really good. He's still one of my favorite players, and I think that they clearly believe he's got something in signing him to that contract and giving him the incentives that they did. But he is also someone I kind of have to see it to believe it. Really, it's Lamar and Mark Andrews for me. I don't disagree with anything Dennis said on J.K. Dobbins. My only fear is dude is out here asking for like a top RB contract. I'm like, dude, you just came back from like a devastating knee injury. Like, let's show it a little bit before we just start telling people you need to get paid. I think he's going to have a good season, though. Baltimore is one of the most intriguing teams to me this season because I could see this being a back to the top of the AFC North and being even better than the Bengals, or completely bottoming out and they're the worst team in the AFC North.
Yeah, I mean, I think you guys kind of touched on it. I, like you, I don't have any questions about Mark Andrews. My only question about Lamar is how many games we're going to see, which I know you can't write people off for injury, but it is a legitimate concern for him. The last 2 seasons, he has not been able to finish. He played 12 games last year. I think he played 11 games the year before. But the rest of the passing game is nothing but questions. Rashad Bateman looked good in the 2 games we saw last year. Didn't see much, from him in his rookie year. So, how available is he going to be? You guys have raised the question. I don't know what Odell Beckham Jr. is going to be like coming back. He looked really good in that stretch run for the Rams and even in the start of that Super Bowl before he tore his ACL again, but he hasn't played in over a year. You said signing them, indicated they thought he still had something left. I also think it indicates how desperate they are to get something going in their passing offense. Zay Flowers, a rookie. Nelson Aguilar, glad you got another contract, guy. I'm not betting on you. Devin Duvernay was their top receiver last year. He started 13 games, only saw 49 targets, caught 37 for 407 yards and 3 touchdowns. The only good thing I can say about their passing game among wide receivers is it literally has nowhere to go but up. So, Matt, what is your pick for best value on the Ravens?
I mean, it's got to be Odell. So right now, according to Fantasy Pros, he's coming off the board as wide receiver 52. All 3 of them are coming off the board within a few picks of each other. Bateman at 45, Zay Flowers at 46. So people are still taking Rashad Bateman as the number 1. I get it. I'm sure some of that is due to the fact that like Lamar has been pumping him up this offseason, talking about how great he's going to be, shoddy be this, shoddy be that. But I think we can all agree that Mark Andrews is the number 1 target, and you're not getting him at a discount. So I'm fine taking him if you want to take him. I think he's arguably going to be the one guy with Travis Kelce competing he's winning you every single week if you draft him early and starting him. So at that point, knowing that I'm not taking Mark Andrews, I'm just going to take the cheapest wide receiver and hope that they blow up. Dennis and myself both think that Odell could be that guy, and he's also the cheapest option. So I'm perfectly fine taking him as wide receiver 52 off the board. To me, that's a massive value because even if he ends up being the one behind Bateman, I don't see him as long as he's healthy, which we're presuming health for all these players. I don't think there's any way Zay Flowers has a better season than Odell Beckham, and he's still going 7 picks ahead of Odell. I'm fine passing on Bateman and hoping that Odell gets me something. Again, where you're taking him in that range, you're hoping for wide receiver 3 upside at that point in the 50s, and I think that he could bring you that. So for me, that would be my best value on the board.
Yeah, at the Dynasty Nerds ADP has Odell going off as the 3rd wide receiver in this group as well. He's going at wide receiver 65, so about 12 spots after Fantasy Pros. They've got the nerds are drafting Zay Flowers number 1. Now, granted, we're Dynasty Nerds and we got rookie fever. So, and that's really, they got Flowers going off at 33 and then Bateman at 42. To me, Flowers is too overpriced as, barely, high-end wide receiver or low-end wide receiver 3 being just what is he, 5'9", 177 pounds or something. There were so many small receivers. Now, one of them is going to hit out of this class. I just don't know which one. And I'm team big wide receiver. I'm not willing to gamble. Rashad Bateman with that foot at wide receiver 42. It's not a value as a wide receiver 4. If I'm getting him in the, wide receiver 55, then I could probably deal with that. But Odell at wide receiver 65 or wide receiver 52 per Fantasy Pros, that's a steal. Another one, if I was going to pivot off of Odell, Isaiah Likely's being drafted as tight end 22 in the Dynasty Nerds startup ADP. Again, going into his 2nd year, he flashed well. Maybe they go with more 2 tight end. They used Darnell Washington and Brock Bowers both at Georgia. And maybe Monken spreads it around amongst the tight ends a little more. I don't think he's going to not use Mark Andrews. But Likely at 6'6", he's a good passing option, good athleticism. And as a low-end tight end too, he's got some high-end tight end too upside.
So I went a little bit of a different way with my value, and I'm going with J.K. Dobbins. Right now, he's going off as running back 19, and I get it. But, Dennis, you talked about he looked really good when he finally was able to get on the field at the end of last season, came out of the end of last season healthy-ish, still averaged 5.7 yards per carry. Matt talked about he wants to get a good second contract. If not now, when, for J.K. Dobbins? And if we can get an actual healthy season from him, I think we're going to see something like what we hoped we were going to see when he was drafted out there. He's had more time to recover from injury. I don't think there's any running backs that they have on the roster that particularly scare you in challenging him for touches if he's healthy and available. And if they get the passing game going a little more and maybe even pass to some running backs, that could be even better for J.K. Dobbins. So he's the one I'm going for with my value. Last year, Dennis, the Ravens were 10-7, but they missed the playoffs. They have missed the playoffs 2 years in a row. Do you see that changing in 2023?
Well, I have them finishing 10-7 again, trying to see if it shows me if they make the playoffs in this scenario.
If you're using the site that we use, it'll tell you the seed in the conference on the
10, so no. So looks like they're out. To me, it's all about having that first-year coordinator, first-year offense. I think there's going to be some growing pains. They had a couple of hiccups on defense last year, so I have them finishing at 10-7 this year again.
Yeah, I'm right around the same range. I mean, while the Bengals have an easy schedule and they both play the NFC South, the other teams that the Ravens get on their schedule, I mean, they got boned on the other teams. That the Bengals, I can't remember who it was, but it was like they got, I don't remember who it was, but they got easy other teams put on their schedule. The Texans and some other. The Ravens get the Dolphins, the Chargers, and the Lions as their other teams. All 3 teams that I think will be competing for the playoffs. I mean, that's not an easy get. Now, they do have the Texans on here, but like they do not have the walk in the park, at least in my opinion, that the Bengals do. I would agree with Dennis. I think there's probably a shot that they go 10-7, maybe 11-6 if they can figure out a way to not. Because again, it's so hard to predict how they'll do against the Browns, the Bengals, and the Steelers because they all play each other so tough that I feel like there's gonna be a way that they work. They're going to lose probably 1, 2, maybe even 3. They may lose to all 3 of those teams, and that's going to really hurt them because of how tough that division can be. And then again, having to play the Chargers and the Dolphins, the 49ers. It's a tough schedule.
It probably has to do with the fact that they were the second place team, and so they're getting the second place teams in those other divisions, and some of the second place teams you just like more. I mean, the Bengals have to play the first place teams, the Jaguars, the Bills, and the Chiefs.
But I don't see like the Jaguars. So I get like the Jaguars, the Colts. I don't see those as like massive. Seahawks. Like, okay, that maybe it's because of how much better I view the Bengals team. I don't view those as really tough
and
games.
Also, we like the Lions better than the Vikings this year, but last year they finished in inverse.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of with you guys. 9-11 wins wouldn't surprise me. I think they'll be hanging around competing for a wild card. Again, I think the Bengals are better. They're in a tough division, and unfortunately for them, they're in a tough conference. There are a lot of these divisions, the AFC South excluded, that go 2 or 3 teams deep, maybe even 4 teams deep with teams you think can compete for the playoffs. If the Ravens were in the NFC, I think it'd be easy to see them getting in. But in the AFC, I think they're going to be in that 6 to 10 team range. They're at the bottom. So that'll do it for us today. I'm looking at the top half of the AFC North. Thankfully, Matt has an entire day off to steal himself away before Friday, when we will look at the Browns and the Steelers and the rest of the AFC North. But Dennis, if the people are taking a day off from work and a day off from working in the yard and just have some free time, kicking it on the couch, waiting for fireworks, what can they do?
They can give us a subscription. Just click that subscribe button, download, listen, rate, review.
There you have it. Hope all of you enjoy your holiday tomorrow. And as Jason Pierre-Paul would want us to tell you, we hope you start with 10 fingers and end with 10 fingers. Be safe out there. Happy 4th of July.